Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. We're in beautiful Park City here at the Kiln building, and this is a beautiful place. I think just a few minutes ago we were talking about how great this kiln.
No, it's really amazing. I wish throughout my career I had such a beautiful environment to work in.
Definitely. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your story, your background, why you became a Grodivo advisor, but first how you got to where you are today and how you got to being the CIO of Oracle.
Oh, great. I went to Michigan's engineering school. And once graduating, I started working for Texas Instruments. And actually, the first 20 years of my career was in the semiconductor business. I quickly transitioned, though, from an engineering role into more of a leadership role. So I ended up getting an MBA at SMU while I was working at TI. I then transitioned to another semiconductor company, which was ultimately acquired by an even larger one. Um, about 10 years later, I was hired to be in charge of all computer integrated manufacturing for Motorola Semiconductor, which is about 55,000 people, ultimately evolved to be the CIO. And then this guy by the name of Tom Siebel had this really successful company in the late 90s. And he said, we need a big time CIO. So let's go get a guy from a big time company like Motorola. And I was recruited away from Motorola, and my wife and I, who I had just married, moved out to California, and I was the CIO of Siebel. When I first joined, I think we did about 300 million in revenue. And then just a year or two later, a couple of billion. So we were growing really, really fast. In fact, we were on the cover of Fortune magazine as the fastest growing company in the United States. But down in 2006, Larry Ellison bought Siebel from his previous employee, Tom Siebel. And Tom kind of insisted at that when the acquisition was going on, Larry, you really need to hire this guy as your CIO for Oracle. And so I ended up doing that until my combined time, Siebel and Oracle. I hit my 20th anniversary, and I decided it's time to move on to the next chapter of my life. And that's what I'm doing now.
Excellent. Well, what a fascinating journey, first of all. And then working with wonderful people and big, names in business like Tom Siebel and Larry Ellis.
So, no, it's been really an incredible experience. So one of the things, though, that I want to tell you about now, though, is this current chapter I'm in. I've kind of divided my life into thirds. One third is staying engaged, and we've got some really innovative startups, not just here in the Salt Lake area, but really around the world. Like one organization I work with out of Israel. And I really like the opportunity, particularly with my focus on artificial intelligence, to keep engaged with that. And one third giving back. I'm on the board of both the business school and the School of Computing at the University of Utah, as well as the governor appointed me to help drive STEM education across the state of Utah. And then one third doing amazing adventures with my gorgeous bride of 27 years. But when I look at working with a company, number one thing I do is the CEO somebody that I'd like to go skiing with, go out to dinner with, somebody I enjoy being with? But the second thing is, are they doing something I'm passionate about? So let me give you an example of one of the companies I've been working with for several years now. It's a company called Brainstorm. And what their goal is to drive adoption of software. And at Oracle, I used to tell my employees, of all the things we can do, the greatest return we can get for the dollar we spend is drive adoption of stuff we already have.
Yeah.
And so, working with a company that's their goal made total sense to me. Likewise, I was acquired by a bigger company during the mid part of my career. And then when I was at Oracle, we acquired over 100 companies during my tenure there. I had just joined the company about a year after the big, really confrontational Siebel acquisition. PeopleSoft acquisition by Oracle. And I came in as part of Siebel. And then, we acquired BEA and Motorola, but, in fact, over 100 companies. So I firsthand got to experience, particularly when you're the IT guy, CIO, you touch every acquisition. Your team touches every single acquisition because we have to assimilate them into our company. And with seeing what Grodivo's doing around really being able to, assess what the culture is, not only of your current company, but a company potentially you're acquiring, but then also help lay that roadmap of how you can be as effective as possible going forward. We saw where there's some giant cultural clashes, like PeopleSoft and Oracle, for example, or even Oracle and Sun. And we saw some great opportunities where we were able to build on those. In fact, learn from the acquiring company, improve our culture at Oracle. So I'm really excited about Grodivo's products, what the mission is. How do we identify where those are, their cultural differences? Are they something that we want to build on and pull the organizations together? Do we have aspirations as to where we would like to take our culture and what we could do about it? In fact, one of the things when I took over as CIO of Oracle, I just joined from Siebel and immediately was made CIO of this whole big company. And we had a year earlier acquired PeopleSoft, which had just acquired JD Edwards. We have Siebel coming in. We have all these legacy Oracle employees. And I'm the IT guy that has all the IT folks from all these different organizations. As you can imagine, we don't have just different cultures because of those three companies, but we're all operating globally.
Yep.
So we have different places around the world. I would have loved to have a tool such as Grodivo that I could really assess what I'm getting into. Where are we aligned? Where do we have disconnects? And then define what is the culture we want to create and what is this roadmap for us to get from where we are to where we want to be.
Excellent. I myself have been part of acquisitions, either on the acquiring side or being acquired, and I've seen the same thing happen over and over again. That's ultimately what led me to work with, Seth Martinez, who's now our chief social scientist, to build what we have today with Grodivo. And we're excited to work with, lots of big companies, but also medium-sized companies or small companies to, advance their culture and change their culture. I wanted to go back to your comment. You mentioned that as CIO, you essentially not only integrated multiple employees and companies from across the globe.
We used the word assimilate at the time, but it kind of evolved over time. But yeah,
I think that's what a lot of people think about when they hear about it.
Yeah, we are the Borg. You will be assimilated.
I've heard that a lot when people have talked about Oracle. But I think on the inside, maybe that wasn't always the case. And I know in conversations you and I have had, your organization, your CIO organization, you bringing in and creating a culture within that was something that was a high priority for you.
Yeah, no, one of the things I loved acquisitions. I loved it. We're a California company. So I asked every one of my employees involved with these acquisitions, I want you to think of yourself as a prospector. More often than not, when you're a big company, you're acquiring a small company, all you do is complain about everything you don't like what they're doing, even if it's actually better than what you're doing. So I asked my employees to think of themselves as prospectors. I don't want to hear about all the rock you find. I only want to hear about those nuggets of gold. And I'm going to recognize and reward those individuals that identify who do they have that's better than the person we have? What technology have they deployed that's better than what we're currently using? What processes are they using that are better than what we have at Oracle? So with that prospector mindset, we looked at every acquisition as a tremendous opportunity to get better. Like one example was the technology that Sun Microsystems had for managing a large global network. We're both our companies, Oracle and Sun, were in about 350 cities around the world. Quite frankly, it was just better than what we had at Oracle. And we said, okay, we're going to make that the standard for everything that we do. The process for doing business analysis and stuff was better at BEA than what we had at Oracle. So we looked at every acquisition as that opportunity to go off and mine those nuggets of gold and then apply them as a standard across our entire organization.
That's really interesting. And I heard you say, better, right? You acquired these companies, you found those nuggets of gold, where they were doing things better. Who decided, what was better or worse between how your approach at Oracle was versus how theirs was? How did you empower people with this prospector mindset?
Well, first of all, you make it so you really acknowledge reward. When somebody suggests, I'm the guy, I'm running our global network team, I acknowledge that what they do is better. If you reward that kind of behavior, that's the kind of behavior you're going to get. But also what we did was very quickly, it just within my organization, it made sense for me. We emerged the like functions. Like the day, a great example, one of the biggest acquisitions was at Oracle Sun Microsystems.
Mhm.
The very day the deal closed, if you were in the service desk, you were part of the global service desk team. If
Mm.
you were network person, you were part of the global network team. If you were in the data center business, you were part of the global data center. In fact, the woman who was running their data centers at Sun, I thought was stronger than the person I had at Oracle. She's now running all data centers both at Oracle and Sun. So that very day didn't mean that we didn't have two separate networks, that we didn't have two separate sets of systems, that we didn't have two separate sets of data centers, but we brought the teams together. And then collectively, they had to figure out what their go forward path is. And there's tremendous synergies. So, for example, if you can imagine that at Oracle, we had roughly 350 cities on our global network. Sun had roughly a similar amount. You can imagine an awful lot of those cities were the same. So there's huge opportunities for driving synergy.
Hmm.
And so I don't remember the numbers exactly, but let's just say we're spending at Oracle maybe $80 million quarter or something on telecom, and Sun was spending $60 million per quarter. So in total, you add those together, you get 140 million. We probably could do it for 90 or so. When you drive the synergies, you're going basically the
Sure.
same cities and stuff, and you combine facilities. But I tell you what, let's just make the budget going forward after you have some time to make this happen 100 million, and you have 10 million to figure out what you want to invest it in. So we drove synergies. The company realized a 40 million. We probably really got our direct costs doing peer-to-peer competitive at 90, and tend to go off and invest in stuff that will allow us to take our network to the next level.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you essentially empowered the combined organization, post day one,
Right.
with that extra 10% to go and say, how can you work together to make things even better?
Exactly. And so by pulling the folks together and saying, okay, you're one team, figure out how to drive as much synergy as possible. Who's got the better process? Who's got the better tools? Standardize on that. So really empowering the organization. I used to say that, and I don't know if this is correct, but it was kind of my feeling of it. I had this phrase that organizations have culture, people don't.
Hmm.
Organizations have culture, people don't. What I mean by that is that if you look at an individual, a salesperson, and I'm not a salesperson, but what do salespeople care about? That they have something incredibly cool to sell, that people actually want to buy, and that they get insanely compensated if they're successful at selling it. I mean, that's what they really care about. And so that you can have different cultures. If you look at the people I hired, engineers, technology people, and so forth, what do they really care about? I get to do cool, interesting stuff that has an impact, that I'll be recognized if stuff goes well, but there's acknowledgement that there's always risk in these projects, so they don't always go perfect. That's what I really care about. So if you keep the organization separate, they'll find ways to try to compete against each other versus we're all trying to compete out in the marketplace. I don't need the competition internally. So pull everyone together within a different skill set and have them figure it out. Was it always pretty? Well, hell no. You're going to have conflicts and who should be in charge and that sort of thing. But you're far better off making quick decisions, pivoting where you need to. Let me give you an example for early acquisition. I was at a company called Tech, which back in the 80s was the largest producer of dynamic RAMs in the world. We were acquired by a larger company, ST Microelectronics, out of Agrate, Italy. And we were really kind of proud of what we were doing, and we're this American company and our systems and stuff, though they were much, much larger. Well, they were incredibly tolerant of, we spent a year, this is how we do it relative to our systems and processes. This is how they do it relative to their systems and processes. And after a year, it was decided, well, we're going to adopt theirs. Well, that was fait accompli. The day of the closure, they just tried the kinder, gentler thing of dragging this thing out for a year, but that was a waste of all of our time, a waste of all of our money. It's much better to just say, this is what we're going to do, get on with it, and let's all go focus and win in the marketplace.
Interesting. As you were talking through all of these examples, I was thinking back to a merger I was part of. It was two $6 billion companies. I was responsible for integrating on the product and technology side. And I remember the first time that we came together was maybe a couple weeks after close. And all of a sudden, I was in a room with lots of people from all over the world who were responsible for different areas of technology. And we essentially had to come together both, in this summit and then in another 2 or 3 summits following that to figure all that out. It sounds like your approach, you had kind of processes and you put a lot of work into the integration planning before close. Is that
No,
correct?
no, at Oracle, we had this kind of rules around acquisitions. First of all, only do something that strategically makes sense.
Mm.
And we used to use examples. I won't go through those of kind of well-known ones where companies bought things that really didn't make strategic sense. The second thing is, don't pay too much.
Mm.
Know what it's worth and don't be tempted by pride, ego, or whatever the case may be to pay more than a company's really worth. So that's number two. Number three is be incredibly good at the integration.
Mm.
Every organization, I think there were 26 different parts of Oracle. We all had our 100-day plan.
Okay.
And we had that 100-day plan and it was reviewed, and we had people representing you they'd come together across the whole company, that each one representing, this is my chunk of this is our 100-day plan, and here's our chunk of it. And every time, then it gets back to my semiconductor, where it's about cycles of learning.
Yeah.
The fourth thing within doing acquisitions at Oracle is repeat often.
Mm.
And just like when we're making silicon wafers and Motorola semiconductor, we want to drive down the cycle time, improve the quality in every one. That's exactly our approach towards doing acquisitions, is how do we drive down the cycle time, improve the quality by improving our plan every single iteration of that.
Interesting. Did you have like TQM, total quality metrics that
Well,
you used?
certainly at Motorola, as
Yeah,
you can
fair enough,
imagine, we
yeah.
did. We weren't incredibly structured on, acquisition metrics and all the kinds of detail that we had, at Motorola, being a semiconductor company, and statistical process control and all those things that we had. But at Oracle, we looked at some key things. I think I've mentioned this to you before. One of the most important one of the most important measurements we used with acquisitions was what percentage of the engineers do we retain, and what percentage of the key people, like in the sales or domain specific organizations, did we retain. That was incredibly important. We expected to, turn over finance, IT, things that were assimilated into the core Oracle, but where the real domain expertise is, we wanted to make sure we retain that. In fact, I won't get this quote exactly correct, but Larry Ellison used to say, we acquire great people, great technology, and great mojo. And, but it really starts with the people. Now, were we always good at it? Hell no. With PeopleSoft, that was total, water and oil kind of thing. And it was a long, long time ago, but it was, a contested, acquisition. And, where Oracle is a very results-oriented, high-pressure driven organization, PeopleSoft had a very collegial, cooperative kind of culture, and, ended up losing, 50% of the PeopleSoft folks probably weren't there a year later. I mean, it was a very successful, because we were running through a period in the history of information technology companies that there was a need for consolidation. And so that's JD Edwards, PeopleSoft, and Oracle all under one roof. Made a lot of sense. But, there's definitely the cultures collided.
Interesting. I want to back up and tie something you said earlier to this conversation about people and how you're integrating them. You mentioned I can't remember your exact quote, but at Oracle, do it often, right? Ultimately, exercising that acquisition muscle will allow you to get those cycles to be better and
Yeah,
better.
one of the things that was really important is that you pull somebody out of their day job to go do this. It first of all takes them out maybe of what their career path was or what have you. They're going off working in acquisition and integration, and then that ends, and there's not anything after that.
Mm.
I mean, it's like going on some sort of leave. What we wanted to do, we wanted to build it into muscle memory. And we wanted, like with the semiconductor business, we wanted to improve our yield and improve our cycle time. I mean, that's what everything about the semiconductor business is. In fact, that's one of the things I wanted to share that what I really, really enjoyed about the semiconductor business. When you're building a brand new wafer fab, you have this huge variety of people engaged with it. You have hundreds, if not thousands, of folks doing the construction, the physical construction, and so forth.
Sure.
You have, you know, tens, if not hundreds, of people that are, designing the full process flow and the tooling and that sort of thing. My organization would handle all the computer integrated manufacturing and automation and material handling throughout this whole thing. Then there would be the people that were managing, bringing in all the, people, the technicians and so forth to operate this. But so you had all these different kinds of roles, even health and safety and environmental and everything else. But you had one focus. That is, how do we drive yield and how do we reduce cycle time? And so no matter you had 100 probably different kinds of roles, but everyone was focused on, a single vision of what we're trying to accomplish. And so taking that incredibly focused thing of building a brand new wafer fab and trying to apply that to how we do that within all of our organizations. What is that clear goal we're trying to accomplish? No matter what your role is, people can see line of sight how they're contributing towards that. And
Absolutely.
by the way, culture's a huge aspect of that. You have to have a culture that we're trying to drive towards a goal bigger than ourselves.
So that's interesting to me that you went from talking about lots of metrics, heavy, quantitative focus types of approaches, processes, continuous improvement, let's say, to then talking about how critical people are. One of the things with Grodivo that we say is along the way throughout the history of business, not every function in business has been quantitative. Before the Great Depression, before GAAP was invented, finance was not standardized, was not quantitative. Before Lean and Six Sigma in the 70s and 80s, operations wasn't necessarily that way. There wasn't that rigor in it. Same with marketing. Before Google came along, marketing was the days of like the Mad Men TV series, right? Well, let's throw $2 million at advertising. If sales go up, that must be because the advertising was good. Ultimately, that changed as well. The marketing is now a science, thanks in part to all the metrics Google put around it. One thing that we see is, people and how people work together and those dynamics that make culture essentially how work gets done, how decisions get made, is something that has yet to be quantified essentially. And that cultural alignment between how people work together is one of the major factors in success of a strategy of M&A, of transformation. I'd love to, on the heels of that, here, double down on this comment of culture being important.
Oh, yeah. I mean, every organization has a financial balance sheet, has a cultural balance sheet. Only one of those two determine how effective you are at operating. I mean, the speed at which you operate, the value at which you operate, the quality at which you operate. It's only one of those two, financial balance sheet and cultural balance sheet. When I think about it, and it really has occurred to me, obviously much later in my career, and even more so as I've been focused on this working with you at Grodivo, is that I think culture, if we think about any kind of group, any tasks getting done, whether a nonprofit we're working with, a business we're working with, if you think of if the culture was optimized, how effective, how productive, how quickly could we generate results, how quickly are decisions made and executed on. That's 2, 3, 4x, force multiplier. I really think that more so than perhaps any time actually during my career, I've evolved, but by having that culture dialed in, people aligned, and you know, having uh, taking away the ambiguity around how decisions are made, taking away the rivalries and things along that line, and everyone's working towards shared goal. I think that we're not talking 10, 15% rounding error kind of improvements. We're talking really order of magnitude kind of level improvements if really dialed in.
Excellent. I know that you're super passionate about AI. In this future world that is really happening now, where AI is taking such a center stage, and at least in this case, it's Gen AI. AI is a very broad topic that includes machine learning
Yeah.
algorithms and all that. But Gen AI is really taking over, and that's in the news and it's everywhere right now. Everyone wants to adopt it. Um, very soon, we're going to see AI agents as colleagues, as managers in
I
organizations.
think if you're having a brainstorming session, you got to have an AI agent sitting there as part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes, I absolutely think that.
How how does it? How do you think it matters in terms of culture fit between people, but also between people and technology, between people and AI? If I have an AI manager, that AI agent essentially understanding how I work, how I make decisions, how I process information, and either mimicking that or using things like NLP to kind of help me help myself along towards this progression of strategy.
Oh, I think I've been blown away over the last 3 years as to how incredibly valuable as coaches, personal coaches, on anything I might want to learn. I'm just amazed at how well AI is doing that. But also coaches as how we can work together or give us common understanding. I can't tell you how many times I've been involved with a discussion and we'll do a voice chat with Grok or ChatGPT, help us understand this and get on the same page. Just my wife and I today were talking about chemtrails and atmospheric seeding to increase precipitation, and
Because there's no snow here in Park
we
City
have
right
no
now.
snow. So our starting perspective was different, but by having an unbiased but educated third party kind of help broker that conversation, doing that all the time. I really quite frankly blown away. If all of the things that we've seen throughout the history of humankind, from fire, literally, including computers, the internet, and web, and so forth, the impact over time period, we've never ever seen anything like we're seeing right now with AI. It's quite frankly changing everything. There's a stupid quote that AI makes us dumber. AI has made me much, much smarter, because if I have the slightest question about anything, in the past, I would have just, okay, that's a slight question. I'll put it on this board that will never get looked at. Right now, I just go and get the answer. And by that, you get educated about that, but it offers up other opportunities. I think that's incredibly useful in the business world. It's incredibly useful in the education world of giving us that opportunity to continue to explore and learn. And, one of the things that I've been touting in my roles at both the business school and the school of computing is we used to have this thing we'd call soft skills.
Yeah.
That communicate, collaborate, plan, manage, and that sort of thing, influence. And then the real focus was how to do accounting, how to do supply chain. In the school of computing, it's algorithms and programming and what have you. Now, what I've been really insisting is the skills that will last our students a lifetime are what used to be called soft skills. I use the term durable skills. How to communicate, collaborate, plan, work together, organize. Those will be with you your entire life. The technical skills are transitory. and can be quickly replaced or certainly learned, leveraging tools like AI. And so I'm really putting this emphasis around these things that as humans enable us to work together and be creative and looking constantly for new opportunities for learning. And AI is just a vehicle for us to do it much quicker.
Excellent. I really like how you talked about these soft skills as durable skills. When I was at business school, University of Virginia's Darden School, the entire time I was there, we kept hearing over and over again, as you get further in your career, you're going to see the value of these soft skills. It's going to be the most important course that you take. I never would have expected I'd be sitting in this seat with a platform to essentially measure those types of soft skills. And the way that our Grodivo Labs science team has designed this software, and also the scientific framework that's backing it, is essentially they're measures that are good on either side. They're perfectly viable ways in everything that we do to do a certain thing, to analyze information, to collaborate, to communicate, and where you essentially have the least gaps, you're going to immediately get on with speak the same language essentially as the person that you're working with or the team you're working with. How do you see the value in solutions like
Oh
that?
no, it's incredible. As I showed the passion a few minutes ago, these durable skills, how we communicate, how we collaborate, how we make decisions, how we are constantly questioning and creativity and so forth, how we plan,
Yep.
all these things, knowing how an organization does that. Do they do it consistently? Or do they, how the organization works, is that consistent with individuals and people in the organization's personal preferences? I mean, these durable skills are the ones I could use the word durable because they last your lifetime. They're the ones that we really need to understand and measure because they determine how effective the organization is, how fast it makes the decisions, how it makes decisions.
Mhm.
When a decision is made, is that decision embraced and acted upon across the organization? So having tooling around this to really be able to take those things, how we communicate, how we collaborate, how we coordinate, how we make decisions, how we plan, and be able to measure. And not that one way is better than another, which probably in some cases they are, but how everyone sees that. If I perceive that we have a very collaborative environment, but no one in the organization does, obviously we have a disconnect there as well. So I would like to know that.
Mm.
And so how I perceive the organization as a leader is operating versus how my employees perceive the organization's running. If those are different, it's clearly I want to know about that and figure out what I'm going to do about it.
Was there a time in your career in one of the many companies that you worked with where you felt that disconnect, either with your manager or with leadership or anybody else in the organization, a team that you worked with?
Of course, you feel that all the time. Like one of the ones I can go way back to my Motorola days is I felt this big kind of disconnect with the gentleman who had the office right next door to me, right next to mine. And he was on my staff, had a leadership role. And we just seemed like two ships passing in the night. Um, and we just had much different style of working. And it turns out I'm intuitive off the deep end. Don't bother me with the data. And he's the kind of person that needs to go and touch every tree in order to see the forest. So as you can imagine, I'm only seeing the forest and he's got to see each tree. We weren't communicating that well. So you actually going through a process to understand the differences. This is early in my career, it was life changing, quite frankly, because I understood that the way he views the world and makes decisions and wants to see things presented and communicates is much different than mine. And that opened my eye that that's got to be happening in all interactions, not just between me and others, but between others within my organization, amongst themselves, or also working with our clients, constituents, users, customers that we have around the world. So really trying to understand how individuals and how organizations communicate, collaborate, plan, organize. is really critical to the overall effectiveness.
Interesting. So you mentioned coaching earlier. It sounds like you both could have used coaches at that time to help each other figure out your place in the organization, how to work together. One of the
I
things,
would rather have tooling actually, like
fair
something
enough.
that just comes up and kind of tells me. I get a little concerned, with some coaching that yeah, back at Siebel we had kind of this joke that the consultants, you would hire them to tell you the time, they'd
Steal
ask you
your
to show
watch.
your watch,
Yeah.
and then they'd steal it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I actually love about AI. I don't have this consultant that's looking at my watch. It's actually, telling me the time and teaching me how to do it. Um, so I do think that there's obviously value in having help along this way. I told you just by doing this, kind of behavioral assessment that we did, we really saw that we fundamentally saw the world differently. So I think things like that can give us a diagnostic not only into ourselves, but our team, our entire organization, can be hugely valuable, particularly if we're willing to do something about it.
Yeah, excellent. You and I have talked a lot about commonalities we share in terms of wanting to give back. You obviously have found places to do that at the University of Utah and also with the state. For us at Grodivo, as I've mentioned before, we're actually launching some sort of a coaching portal where coaches can use our Grodivo tools to help individuals with whatever their goals are, either in the workplace or if they're feeling like they don't fit. And part of that, we are expecting this network of coaches to also give back to individuals, right? So those that might be job impacted, or lower in an organization and have never had access to coaching. We're definitely leveraging our AI, kind of like you mentioned, but also the individuals that already have that experience and expertise together with the tools. I
I think that's like incredible. I look at tooling. If you are a somebody who builds furniture, and you just have a handsaw, and you have a certain level of productivity, but if you're given a table saw and
Mm.
and electric sander and all these other things, you can really dramatically improve what you're able to do. People that are coaching individuals, coaching organizations, giving them first tools to understand who they're working with, and then tools to help them move to where they want to move. It dramatically improves the overall effectiveness. So I really like to applaud what you're doing with these coaches, because I think in the going forward, the an individual that's acting as whether it be a consultant or some sort of coach is going to improve their overall effectiveness dramatically by leveraging tools. Just take the area of psychotherapy and
Mm.
psychology. Now you might have a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting, and now as a psychotherapist, again, I don't know anything about this field, but I'm just imagining that as part of that, you can give your client a therapist in their pocket that you can both be checking in with, that it can dramatically improve the effectiveness and the timeliness of, because it's not just 1 hour once a week or once a
Yeah.
month or whatever the case may be. We've got this ongoing thing because we're leveraging technology and those things that, quite frankly, whatever field you are, no one knows everything. So to be able to stand on the shoulder of others, and quite literally with what we're seeing with AI, you're standing on the shoulder of millions
Yeah.
of that collective knowledge and being able to apply it effectively. So I applaud what you're doing to enable these coaches to dramatically increase their value if they didn't have a tool set like Grodivo.
Oh, thank you. It's not something that we're very at the very beginning of that journey, so
Mhm.
it's kind of more of a coming very soon type of
Yep.
an approach. But interestingly enough, you mentioned psychotherapy and treating clients and patients, essentially that kind of provider and patient relationship. I know that a number of providers in the healthcare services and mental health services are wary, of the type of information coming from AI. And
Are they
ultimately,
wary of the information, or are they threatened by what it can do?
I think they're wary, not threatened as much, but the wrong information at the wrong time to the right person is where the concern is. And ensuring
I'm not totally convinced. I think they may be saying that, but I think they are threatened. But I could be totally wrong. As I've talked to people in different
yeah,
disciplines, whether it's software engineers, lawyers, health providers, surgeons, teachers, they're at one level, they will give you, reasons why humans better and so forth. But, there's oftentimes this underlying thing of being threatened. But you're right. Absolutely. If somebody's giving somebody therapy, we've heard all these horror stories about people who were suicidal, for example, and not coached appropriately.
mm.
There are definitely, just like there's bad advice from humans, there's certainly going to be lots of bad advice from, AI agents.
Well, and I bring that up. We're obviously, we're doing nothing in the sense of treating patients. The coaching clients that would go through our network of coaches and use our tools. These are our standard employees, stakeholders within an organization, leaders, board members, line employees, all the way through the organization. But I think the parallel there is essentially we have striven to ensure that all of the information we curate into our proprietary framework and database is based on peer-reviewed and top-tier research. And I think that's where a lot of the concern, in the health services is, hey, there's going to be information that isn't necessarily validated. And how do you ensure that it's validated?
No, that's amazing, because if you can really ensure that how the model is trained,
Yep.
that all of the information that went into training that model has been validated, the quality of what you're going to get out of that is going to be, much, much better. Like right now, these foundation LLMs, like, OpenAI and Grok and Gemini and so forth, they're kind of as smart as the collective everything on the internet.
And they
Well,
pull everything from the
they pull
entire
everything
internet.
from the internet.
Yeah.
While I'm once again blown away with the quality of the results, a curated, if it's trained on the information that's been validated, it's going to be much, much better, and particularly you can trust it a lot more. If things are really critical, like life and death or what have you, that has to be absolutely core to the approach.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I've been a sponsor of M&A deals before and of, multi-million dollar transformations, 10, $20 million. Sometimes it feels like life and death. Clearly it's not. So let's make that distinction there. But definitely it can feel like life or death to a career or to, a strategy that you've put yourself on the line to push forward as the right way forward. Have you ever been in a situation like that where you feel like, you're on the line for delivering what it is that you've kind of put yourself on the line for?
100 times. I mean, no,
All the acquisitions for the
no, the like one, I go back to at Motorola.
Mhm.
I made the decision. I really pushed it to back in the early 90s that we were going to standardize on, SAP for, our ERP. We had built up tools within Motorola Semiconductor to kind of do that core kinds of stuff. And, we're talking tens of millions of dollars, a couple hundred people, taking on something like that. It's not only my personal reputation, but it's the whole collective team. And more importantly, it's our whole company.
Yeah.
We're actually doing a core system heart transplant while we're, trying to operate the business and be successful. So, that was obviously a large scale thing, but there are things going on. Like, for example, every single day, well, let me share a little story with you. I have a friend here in Park City who's CEO of a company, and he was telling me about, how his kind of tough weekend. He was doing a major release of their software. It's a cloud-based service, so it impacts every customer when they change it, and it didn't quite go well.
Mm.
But you combine that with his largest customer, maybe that Thursday, had requested to do a SOX 2 audit and do that on Tuesday. So combined with doing an upgrade that didn't go well, with having to prepare for this audit, he goes, it was tough. And he goes, well, that's the trials and tribulations of, running a startup. And I told him, there is not a single minute in a single day, in a single week, in a single month, in a single year, that somewhere in the world I didn't have a crisis. And when I was, a CIO of Oracle. So don't tell me about your one weekend. And so the thing is that, at scale, you have all these things going on, and it's really, we talked about culture, how a company reacts, and or how an organization. I'll bring very specifically how my team, when you have a tsunami in Japan, or you have a earthquake in Chile, and so these are kind of big things that make the news, but things like that are going on all the time at maybe a smaller scale. But we had an awful lot of scale. How you deal with Katrina, and not only the impact on Oracle, but the impact on hundreds, if not thousands, of our customers with, what's going on with their data centers and everything else. How, one of the things, I think really is a good way to assess culture is not how things go when everything's going right, but how do you react when things are hard and going wrong? And you get to experience a lot of that when you're a CIO.
I imagine, really exposing those thorns and seeing where, maybe the rose was very pretty, and then all of a sudden, you're getting poked.
Well, for example, not so directly related, but we, in order to ensure that we could keep our global network up all the time, we had diversity. So we had different providers, like providing telecommunications between the US and Asia. During the tsunami we had in Japan, little did we realize that while we had two different providers, they were running on the same undersea cable. So fortunately, we actually circled the world. And so we just had to reroute the traffic all the way around the other way. But, only a company the scale of Oracle do you have the opportunity to do that. And that's back when, private networks were absolutely core. Of course, an awful lot now is carried by the internet and so forth. So it's less of an issue for those kinds of things. But, things happen that you can't account for. But that's one of the things I want to get back to culture is, again, when things are going great, it's not a big deal. But what really puts your culture to a stress is when things happen, and things are going to happen.
Absolutely. It sounds like lots of things happened during your tenure, and even the scope of your role changed over time.
Well,
Can you talk a bit more about, maybe what that scope was when you arrived at Oracle, or maybe Siebel, and then how it expanded and changed?
Okay, well, I was hired, day one as the CIO of Siebel, back in August of 1999. And again, I think we were 300 million-ish or whatever. And it got to be where we were opening an office a week somewhere in the world. We were growing like crazy. And so you're onboarding and all those sorts of things, the scale, it was exciting, moving fast and so forth. But still, at the time of being acquired by Oracle in 2006, we were, I don't know, 5,000 employees or something like that. And, I was offered the role to be CIO of Oracle. Well, suddenly I'm going from 5,000 to 50,000 employees, which is more similar to what Motorola Semiconductor was. It was about 50,000 employees, but a much larger team kind of scattered around the world. And at that time, we were, maybe 10 billion in revenue. And just a handful of years later, well, when I stepped away from my day job, we were about 140,000 employees, well over 40 billion in revenue, and just the scale of the products and everything. But during that time, an awful lot had changed. When I first joined, we didn't have anything in quite what, cloud computing. when I left, essentially everything we were doing
Mm.
was cloud
That's
based.
a big transformation.
It's a huge cultural
Yeah.
transformation. If you think about it, let's just take it from a sales perspective. You're working at Oracle, you're working at Siebel, you're used to going and selling an on-premise deal where it could be hundreds of thousands, millions, even tens of millions of dollars if it's with a large organization like AT&T or Cisco or
And that's equipment plus software essentially.
well, mostly, I'm just really talking as a software
Yeah.
salesperson.
Mhm.
Uh, when you switch to cloud services, it's month by month. There's not this whole big, I'm getting revenue for $5 million deal, and I'm getting compensated on the revenue of $5 million deal. I'm now being compensated on something that pays out over time. So my compensation's likewise similar. That is kind of a big switch to make. If you look at it from an engineering standpoint, one of the things that if you're an on-premise software provider, you've got engineers that are, sitting in a lab somewhere building stuff that, gets handed off, gets delivered to a customer. They validate it, verify, see that it works in their environment, and they're ultimately accountable for it running in the environment that they set up. And, they will have issues and they'll reach back in and goes to a customer support organization, but then that's a step removed actually from those engineers. When you're a cloud company, you actually have to engineer to operate at hyperscale. And when you deliver product, you're actually delivering it in production, impacting customers immediately. So the whole integrated DevOps is a huge cultural transformation. And so when we went through that, as many companies did, Microsoft, Adobe, and others, you're fundamentally changing not only what you're doing and how you do it, but one thing that happens with cloud, generally, I'd argue service companies, they have to be much more integrated. You can't have the big silos that you could have more historically with on-premise companies. And we discovered that quickly. I was used to doing the acquisitions of relatively big companies like Siebel and BEA and Sun Microsystems and so forth. But then, as we were starting to make this migration towards cloud services, we started acquiring these relative to us small native cloud companies. And they were entirely integrated across the company and everything they did because they were offering a service.
Mm.
So it impacted what they sold, how they engineered, how they operated it. So you didn't have the kind of the big silos that you could see in more of an on-premises company, or even a semiconductor company like we had at Motorola. It had to be much more of an integrated ecosystem. So one of the things that we saw, I told you earlier, we liked learning from acquisitions we made, that after a handful of acquisitions in the native cloud space, we discovered that, and this was well over a decade ago, that Slack was the operating system or the nervous system that linked their entire business together and how they operated. So we would have had to pry it out of their cold, dead hands. And so one of the things that I'm proud of, we were one of the first, if not the first, kind of large scale Fortune 100 company to adopt Slack as a standard on how we communicate and collaborate. We learned that from these small cloud native companies. In fact, I told you how the big acquisitions like a Sun Microsystems, PeopleSoft, and we always looked for these things that they did better, who they had better in processes. But we also had similar learnings from these small cloud native companies on how they operated as an integrated ecosystem and how they service their customers. Of course, they didn't, a good thing for them, they didn't have to deal with the localization, the globalization, the scale, the security, all those things that we had to do at Oracle, but it allowed them to be much more nimble, much quicker, adopt things faster. Of course, if we brought it into Oracle, we had to deal with those other things, but it gave you an opportunity to see what was possible. And now, how do we apply this at something at the global footprint and global scale of an Oracle? So it was a really great learning experience on so many different fronts. So I look at acquisitions as this, I'd much rather acquire a company than, hire an individual. You acquire people that have culture and teamwork and that sort of thing, and they're doing things that you can learn from. And since you're acquiring them, you can, if they've got a technology, take it. If they've got um, software, take it and apply it.
Well, that's an interesting thing that you say. There are different strategies for different deals, let's say, right? Some are technology focused deals, some are competency and expertise focused deals, some are simply buying a business for the financial metrics, the revenue, the
It can be
profit.
kept totally independent.
Exactly. How have you seen? You mentioned previously one of the key metrics you looked at was how many people you retained 6 months later. Uh, how could you have better made those decisions in terms of adopting a specific culture strategy or identifying who to immediately start to work with and help them bridge towards the target culture, let's say, of whatever that deal strategy was?
Well, we saw it time and time again. I mean, Larry talked about we acquire great people, technology, and mojo. Well, sometimes we didn't do so great on the mojo. What happens if you've got this big team and you're acquiring a small technology that to complement your bigger thing? It's sometimes you overlook what made them so special. Yeah, if the engineers, a team of 10, get immersed into a team of hundreds, if not thousands. They're used to having a degree of autonomy. They're used to having a degree of understanding and communicating and being able to influence. And suddenly they're a cog in a much, much larger wheel. I don't care whether you're Oracle, who you are, it's very easy to kind of lose sight of that and lose, the not only lose the potential value, but lose, the people. As soon as um, it's ambiguous as to how decisions are made, the best people are going to leave because they have options.
Yeah.
And so it required, not just at an Oracle level, but all the way down to the organization working with them. How do we, you know, understand that we're acquiring great people? Well, how do we really take advantage of that? How do we take their technology? But let's not screw up their mojo. If they have something that's really kind of clicking, well, let's figure out how to do it. We acquired one company out of the Denver area, and core to how they operated as a team was CrossFit.
Oh,
They had this whole CrossFit kind of culture and stuff. And we wanted to, obviously, one of the areas that you drive synergy is in facilities. So we have this huge campus. It was a Sun campus originally in Broomfield, Colorado, and they were only a handful of miles away. It made sense to merge them into this. Well, I was proud of the fact we actually built a CrossFit gym in the middle of their workspace, similar to what they had to try to help retain that mojo.
how did that work?
Um, it was well received. They would have been happy to have kind of been separate in their own place, but certainly appreciated the effort that Oracle's putting in, on doing that. And so doing those sorts of things, I think they meet with some level of success, mixed success, I would say, because you have a lot of other things going on. When somebody's used to working with a company that's 60 people and now they're at a company with 140,000, there are going to be changes. You don't have visibility to everything you're seeing. Even though I was CIO at Siebel and then going to CIO at Oracle, my level of seeing what's going on in the business at a 5,000-6,000 person versus at the time 40,000-50,000 person, it's different. And so you try to do your best to adapt. But as the organization, I think you also need to understand, what's important to these people that have more of autonomy just because of its scale. And as they join the big company, really appreciate, what they perceive is the culture in which they're used to working with, which is quite likely going to be much different than the culture in a much larger company, if nothing else, just because the scale drives a certain level of discipline.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. We like to say the major tech companies like Oracle, like your Apple, Microsoft, Google, Meta, uh, they likely started way on that far side of innovation. Fail fast, move quickly. But over time, as you grow in scale, you essentially start to move towards incorporating process, having controls in place, which come with being a large, in some cases, public company or a large private company as well. You
But I do think some companies handle this, different. I know, I'm certain they handle it differently. Like one of the things that I loved about, both at Siebel and Oracle was, I've shared with this before, is I actually viewed myself a bit as an anthropologist, kind of
Hmm.
looking at the culture of what caused Motorola to work the way it did. How did I just was jettisoned into Sable, and I got to observe how this company is growing very, very quickly. And then when I was at Oracle, a little bit of an anthropologist of what makes this whole thing kind of work. So I came up with this list of these 10 things, had nothing to do with technology, but it's all about leadership. But one of the things on the list that I really saw that Tom Siebel and Siebel embraced, and then Oracle totally embraced, was you can recover from a poor decision. There is no recovery from indecision.
Hmm.
So there was this immense bias towards action. And there are a lot of big companies that aren't that way. That whole saying, though, of that being willing to, recover from a poor, there is no recovery from poor decision, but there is no recovery from indecision, but you can recover from a poor decision. That was kind of baked into the culture. It's assumed that some of the decisions we make are not going to be right, and we're going to need to do mid-course corrections. It's assumed some are going to have to be reversed, but we're going to be so much better off by making the decision quickly
Hmm.
and executing against that, but also appreciate that we might have to, change something along the line.
Interesting. You mentioned that this smaller company you integrated in Bloomfield, Colorado, that the CrossFit and kind of those parts of culture were only one element, right? Decision is another element. You've mentioned communication and collaboration, decision making, and others. Uh, Ultimately, we see 8 different dimensions of culture that the research says are critical dimensions. Uh, as you think of how you might have integrated this systems thinking into your previous integrations or transformations, where is the learning point in terms of helping people adapt to culture or forming and being very intentional of how you drive culture and how that aligns to strategy?
Well, first of all, if you went off and measured it and said, if I went out, did assessment across the whole organization and just shared with everyone, this is our culture. Some of you, and maybe this is how it's working within your team, whether geographic based or functional based. This is kind of how you perceive. This is how the people that are in your sphere of influence perceive things. This is how, at a broader level, we perceive it. Here's how your colleagues, around the world, or maybe an entirely different function, kind of perceive things. It would be really informative for all of us to kind of get the view of that scatter diagram, so to speak, of how we all perceive. And then I think it'd be useful to have that dialogue. Well, what would we like it to be?
Hmm.
What would be optimal for the kind of business we're in? Given that we have mission critical things, like, for example, you know, we were the only organization that on a moment's notice could stop everything.
Hmm.
If you're running the global ecosystem, the global network, the global operating system, you have an opportunity to screw up big time. And so,
Did you have a red button in your office that you had?
oh, by the way, we used to have those in data centers, and that was don't want to go there. But anyway, the whole thing is you have to define the culture, also align with your mission. We've discussed how the military has, very much of a, command and control, kind of culture, because that's required for their mission. Well, some of the things that we're doing in running a global IT function, you need very quick decision making. You need rigorous process that's been validated and tested, and you might have two hands on every change that gets made, or whatever the case may be. You have to look at what's your mission and what are the metrics you have to execute against it and adjust it accordingly. But having a tool where we could go off and look at all the different demographics and stuff, what is our current culture, and then have actually design the culture that we want to have. And it not doesn't necessarily need to be all the same across everything that we do on a global basis. We may have some functions that need to have a certain kind of decision making, and maybe the innovation arm of our organization has a bit different. We have this underlying foundation that we're all working collectively together as a team, but the way that we operate in some of the very specific things could in fact be different. But wouldn't it be great is you design your carpeting, you design the walls, you design, the offices and cubicles and everything. Wouldn't it even be more important to design the culture you want to have and see that you're taking steps to get there?
We would say absolutely. I wanted to dig down a little deeper into the early part of your career. I know becoming an executive of Fortune 100 company doesn't happen overnight. So I'd like to hear, what early experiences in your career kind of formed your path and helped you decide that you wanted to quote unquote climb the ladder, let's say, into large companies and big leadership.
Well, first of all, I never had any aspirations of being the CIO of Oracle. I grew up a very humble. My dad was a factory worker, and I think our living room's the size of a house I grew up in. I feel immensely blessed, quite frankly. But each step, kind of one step led to another. That I was always focused on. I want to do the best I can and treat people well, and everything will kind of take care of itself. And it turns out, in my case, a lot of things just kind of fell in my lap. I really only, if you think of um, jobs as like new phone numbers, basically. I started off at Texas Instruments, but some of the friends I left for this company called Mostech, and they were acquired by ST Microelectronics. That was a decade.
Yes.
And then I was asked by the CEO of ST Microelectronics, who used to work at Motorola Semiconductor, hey, why don't you go meet with Les Schroyer, who is the CIO at Motorola Semiconductor, and see what lessons you can learn. And that happened to be, he was from Italy and we were in the United States, and it happened to be a discussion that we were just leaving the conference room. And sorry about that. We're just leaving the conference room. He just happened to say, well, why don't you go meet with Les Schroyer and see, exchange ideas and so forth. So I flew to Arizona, where Motorola Semiconductor was headquartered at the time, and talked to all sorts of different people. And then Les reached out and said, "Hey, would you like to come run all computer integrated manufacturing at Motorola Semiconductor, or would you like to go run all computer aided design at Motorola Semiconductor?" Because I was at a smaller company, so I had been exposed to everything. And so, take a bigger organization, at Motorola, and, I just had the experience across many domains that they didn't have. So had Squally Pistorio not mentioned as we're walking out of a meeting that he's flying in from Italy to go talk to him, that would have never occurred. And so I ended up a decade at Motorola Semiconductor, which the headquarters moved to Austin, and we're building all this elaborate fab technology and stuff, and automating all the material handling, and just a wide variety of things. And the phone rings, and it's Heidrich and Struggles, and they say, "Mark, have you heard of Siebel?" Well, I heard a little bit about this company. Well, they're looking for kind of a big time CIO, and Motorola won the Malcolm Baldrige Award. They invented Six Sigma. We'd be interested in talking to them. And yeah, I'd just gotten married. I built a house in Austin. I love Austin. Wasn't too interested in moving, But my wife suggested, well, we had just gotten married, like I said, why don't we go do a trip to the Bay Area? And so we did. And, I ended up, being the CIO of Siebel. And again, we mentioned earlier, it was incredible to be with a company that was just a rocket ship growing so fast. And then with the 2001, 2002 dot-com bomb and everything, that was hard for all tech companies. But ultimately, when the company was acquired, by Oracle, the last thing I wanted to do, having gone from that Motorola semiconductor, very decentralized, to Siebel, which was immensely centralized and standardized, the last thing I wanted to do was work for a big company again. Also, I didn't want to leave Park City, but Oracle gave me a situation I couldn't refuse, and it was one of the best decisions of my life because I had incredible experience at Oracle, not only through this huge transformation, growing from 40, 50,000 to 140,000, quadrupling revenues, but this whole transition in technology, whether it be the whole obviously cloud computing, but other things that happened during that time, we acquired a lot of verticals. And so we started getting specialization into the communications business, the utilities business, the healthcare business. So all the opportunity that brought in, we started doing things. We acquired a hardware company. We started building servers and storage. I can tell you one of my not so favorite days at the time. I believe in my Austin data center, I was the largest single installation of Dell computers anywhere on the planet. And I was the largest single installation of NetApp storage systems anywhere on the planet. Well, the day that it was announced that we're acquiring Sun, Larry reaches out and says, "You're not buying another thing from Dell, and you're not buying another thing from NetApp." And, but by the way, we're taking in stuff, in the hundreds per week kind of thing. And it's not just a one for one, swap. So, some of those were kind of challenging events along the way, but they're also great experiences. But not only myself had tremendous experiences with the technology changes that we did, the scale that we did, the people that I had the opportunity to work with, but then also the customers that I had the opportunity to engage with. I did hundreds, if not thousands, of customer facing events, from small one-on-one meetings. Actually, that was one of my favorite things as being CIO of both Siebel and Oracle, is to actually go meet with customers and learn about their business. In fact, I learned about businesses I didn't even know existed. And so it was incredibly fascinating. But, my wife and I ended up hosting innumerable, big life events that we'd host for our customers, whether it be all the America's Cup races or the BNP Paribas tennis tournament in Indian Wells or other things as well. And, had this opportunity to really build this rapport with my CIO colleagues, kind of around the world. And, it was just really fabulous experience, all around. But one of the things that I still incredibly grateful for and still interact with somebody, it seems nearly daily, and I've been 6.5 years since I retired from my day job, is, the team that I got to work with, incredible set of folks. And what I really like is that in many ways, so many of them are so different than I am. Like, for example, my person that just comes to mind right now, he was basically my chief of staff at Siebel and then as well as Oracle. And we couldn't be, more different. Um, I'm a very big picture kind of person, and he's very detail oriented. So, I didn't have to worry about things like budgets and that sort of thing. I just had here's our direction, and he'd go handle, kind of all the detail and all the pieces that have to come together and how we allocate all this stuff out. So, really complemented my strength with his strength.
Oh, that's great. It sounds like if I were to put a word on maybe what has driven you in your career, it's curiosity and technology and people, customers, you mentioned business, maybe everything except budgets. Is that a fair statement
Yeah,
though?
no,
Curiosity?
even more so to this day. I was heading to my retirement party at Oracle. I was flying to the Bay Area, and my wife, my son was in high school at the time. She was going to take him to high school and then catch a later flight and join me for the party. But as I'm heading on the freeway, I voice message her, that I'm thrilled to be retiring, happy, healthy, um, deeply curious,
Hmm.
and madly in love. And the deeply curious aspect of it, I had expected that I would learn at a faster rate than I'd ever learned in my life. And now we're 6.5 years since that call, and it's absolutely true. I now have the opportunity to spend much larger portion of my day, being curious, learning about things. Now with the tool sets we have with AI and so forth, it makes it even easier to continuously learn. And so I'm hoping to instill that beginning with my two sons, but also I do a lot of, mentoring, coaching, guest lecturing, at not just the University of Utah, but a couple others as well. And that's one of the things that I hope to instill a little bit into them is this constant curiosity, because that's what makes life fun.
Yeah. How does that apply to people? You mentioned mentoring and coaching. Have you had good mentors along the way? Have you, learned things from them that you then are passing on, let's say, to the next generation or others down the line?
I'd like to say that there were these couple of people who just changed my life, but yeah, and I'm sure there were, but they were all kind of in subtle ways.
Hmm.
One of the things is my father being a steel worker, uh, he couldn't quite understand everything that I was doing, but the things that I learned from him, I actually wrote him a letter when I was like 40 years old that I can never remember him ever telling a lie.
Hmm.
I can never remember him not stopping to help somebody. I can never remember him not engaging somebody in the line in the grocery store and talk to him. And
My
so,
dad's the same way, by the way.
until my mom passed away, he was madly in love with her. And so, perhaps my most important lessons I learned from a source that couldn't even comprehend at any form or fashion, the kinds of stuff I was doing. And he passed away, a decade and a half ago or so. And so much has happened even since then. But nonetheless, he was of great influence. All these really impactful people I've had the opportunity to work with at some level or another, whether it's people just on passing, like Steve Jobs, for example, or people I spent a fair bit of time with, like Tom Siebel and Mark Hurd and Safra Katz and Larry Ellison. All of them had these really great qualities that I wanted to pick up, and all of them had some things that, well, I might choose a little bit different path. So I think that's one of the things that I've tried to do is what are those lessons that I want to institutionalize, really instantiate in my own being, and hopefully, at some point, I can be that better person, that better version of myself.
That's really interesting because you and I haven't had that conversation before, but it's a very strong tenet that I feel I've always striven to do is everyone that I meet, I feel like there's something that I can learn from them. And so that curiosity and trying to get to know them and really, find out what can I take away, also give, of course, how can I help people around me? But that curiosity in people has driven me throughout my career and in every other part of my life. Yes, there are always people, kind of like you said, that you're not going to emulate everything they do, but how can you find things and see those things that you might want to make better in yourself as you progress?
Yeah, I always thought with mentoring, um, you know, you have so much to learn. I always felt that I got more than I ever gave
Mm.
because, like just for example, mentoring, you know, people in their 20s. I have so much to learn from them, what they're doing technically, how do they think, what are their ambitions. Things are much different than when I was 20 years old. And so it gives me a new, brighter, open perspective on things. And hopefully I can give them some advice or two that they can find valuable along the way.
Well, that's a great segue to actually a question I wanted to ask you. A lot of people ask, what's some advice you would give to the younger generation or to yourself, early in your career? I like to flip that and say, what piece of advice could your early self have given you as a senior executive?
Well, one of the things is that I loved being an engineer right out of college and also while I was in college, building stuff. But fairly quickly, I evolved into leadership roles, and the amount of opportunity I had to actually build something and do something and create something, declined. What I could do is I could, launch 1,000 ships, you know, but to actually, be part of that. And so I would have advised myself, stay actively, devote some part of every week that you're actually building stuff and get the joy and satisfaction from that. There's so many things my current self would have liked to help my younger self along, and probably the whole journey would have, not that I have any regrets, but it'd been a little bit easier, a little bit smoother,
Less scars.
a little less scars for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for meeting with us today. We're going to get back together and dig down even deeper into some of those acquisitions. Today, I'd like to dig a little deeper on some of those acquisitions, if that's all right.
Sure.
And yesterday you mentioned a lot about how the muscle memory and process of integrating these companies was critical. I'd love to hear more about what that process was and where you found that to be successful, where there were challenges, and how today's tools could help overcome some of those challenges you had early in your career.
Well, so first of all, when you're bringing in a group of people from an acquisition, oftentimes the culture's much different, the scale's much different, what they do is much different, and somehow you want to assimilate them, keep the people, keep the technology, keep the mojo, and at the same time drive the synergies and make it accretive. If you think about it, one of the things that we had at Oracle is three organizations that were evolved, and we had to be really tightly linked because we touched every single acquisition, is the IT organization, the HR organization, and facilities. And so what we really focused on over the years, keep continuing to refine our playbook. How do we engage with these new employees? How do we onboard them? How do we make them feel part of Oracle? At the same time, educate them on the 1,000 things that new employees need to know, everything from how to get in the door to how we work in terms of the business processes and that sort of thing. But we also found, though, that in doing so, everyone comes in with, different knowledge base, but also a different culture, different style of working, different style of engaging, different style for how decisions are made. And so it was important for us to appreciate and understand, morph to this is what we'll do at Oracle, but also be open and listen to what are the things we don't want to break the business that we acquired because we just change it so dramatically. So it was a balancing act of being understanding and listening and so forth, because the easiest way to lose people is be ambiguous as to how decisions are made. And so, if they're used to a very collaborative environment, we need to understand that and walk through what our process is so we come up with the best decisions. One of the things I think I mentioned yesterday, I found at Oracle, certainly at the highest levels of Oracle, it was the want to be informed, but had a bias towards action. And so it was built into the culture. We're going to listen to what you have to say, but let you be known that when we walk out of the room, a decision's going to be made, and we expect everyone to follow that.
Interesting. How often did you see, crossed wires or maybe pushback as people were getting used to this new style of working?
Well, it happens all the time. You come in as an acquisition. First of all, while it may be a company acquiring of 100 people, there are 100 individuals as well that have different modes and styles and preferences and that sort of thing. So some people adjust to the change a lot easier
Mm.
than others. There's always fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So it's really important, and we put big effort on who are the people that really are the ones we have to make sure we embrace as part of this. Perhaps give them, a position or role or what have you, where we don't have all the information, but we just have this kind of gut feel that they deserve a leadership position, whether it's managerial leadership, but another very important kind of leadership is technology leadership.
Hmm.
You're going to lead the direction for what we're doing in this particular domain. So, everything that we did, it was done more by intuition and gut feel and going out and talking to people. If we had some tooling, some facility to help us understand not only how the organization clicks, but what makes each individual click, that would have been tremendously helpful.
And it sounds also like those individual teams then also were a part of that math, let's say, in terms of how they work together. There might be slight differences, say, in the technology side versus the people side versus finance. Uh, were you able to see that as a leader? The technology team working one way, your IT team working another way, others.
Yeah, well, of course, if you look at different organizations, they're going to have different levels of assimilation. If you acquire a product team, and one of the things that I think Larry and Safra and Mark and others did well is when we acquired um, verticals, industry verticals. If you think about it, Oracle started off as a horizontal company, a database you can use across any organization, moved up the food chain into middleware, and then horizontal applications, which include ERP, HR, CRM, and so forth. But in the early 2000s, started wanting to move to get closer to a customer's primary applications. And those were in spaces like retail, utilities, communications, and so forth. And it would have been really easy to make an acquisition, let's say, of a retail point of sale company and just kind of blend it into this big horizontal behemoth.
Yes.
But a great call. We're going to keep that separate. We're going to create these global business units where we keep the domain knowledge. It's led by a leader from that domain, and they are doing the go to market and they're doing the engineering within that, all sitting atop and morphing over time to leverage the Oracle underlying base platform. So, in many ways, able to keep the culture of what made that company successful, what made it an acquisition target for us. Yesterday, Larry talked about we acquire great people tech and mojo, trying to keep whatever of that mojo we could. At the same time, things like the scale, whether it's the scale of course, finance and HR and IT, those sorts of things, but also the scale of reach.
Mm.
We had 25, 30,000 people in sales around the world. Now, granted, everyone's not carrying the same bag with all the same things in it, but nonetheless, it gives you a global reach, gives you access to customers. You get the phone's much more likely to be answered if the call's coming in from Oracle as coming in from a tiny little startup. And so we wanted to take advantage of our strengths and reach, but also create that autonomy. A great example where that worked really, really well was NetSuite. NetSuite was essentially the first cloud application
Mm.
company. A lot of people don't realize, but it predates Salesforce. In fact, Mark Benioff was the best man at founder Evan Goldberg of NetSuite's wedding. So they both were at Oracle. Larry funded NetSuite. He also was an early contributor to Salesforce. But so there was this whole cloud understanding Larry actually had in the late 90s, just that we had this big on premises thing. And so, as part of doing this, though, we had organizations come in with their mindset, their mojo, and people. And so maybe 10 years ago, Oracle acquired NetSuite. And it was kind of a fine-tuned, well-running machine, and it was kept roughly for a decade. It's a little bit more integrated now. It's completely standalone because we didn't want to break it.
Hmm.
We broke other things for sure, by trying to bring them in and not be able to keep that process, the culture, and so forth. But we certainly made mistakes, but also had an awful lot of successes. So some of the keys were, if something's truly, independent, like the global business units where they have to have domain experience, I need to understand retail in order to sell and build products
Hmm.
to retail. I need to understand life sciences to build product and sell to them. Keep that separate, but at the same time, leverage the big global reach of the Oracle platform and technology so we can uplift, these specific business units.
Sounds really easy.
Oh, no, it's incredibly challenging. And, it's like one of those things that if you get like 50% right, that's actually really, really good. As hard as this stuff is.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, a lot of the statistics out there in terms of M&A success say that 75% of M&A fails, and the majority of that is due to culture. As I think about, you mentioned the breadth of all of these different businesses kind of working together on the
I
back.
believe Oracle has the broadest line of SKUs of any software company
Mm.
in the world.
Well, and so that being the case, how did you ensure along the way that those companies, maybe that had specific domain expertise like retail, would eventually kind of come into the fold and integrate, them? Well, they wouldn't integrate themselves; that you would integrate them and make sure they
Well,
had
what we would
access.
do is I was the CIO, so from the technology platform, I wanted to see the way they communicated were secured, the underlying infrastructure, the business applications for like doing business processings, like finance and so forth, was absolutely the same.
Yeah.
But we wanted them to have their autonomy relative to their go-to-market and the products they build. And over time, we would move them onto the Oracle platform, the Oracle database, Oracle cloud infrastructure, Oracle middleware, those sorts of things. But, it's something that you had to balance over time. One of the things that you always have as a technology leader, I'm sure you have this as a CEO, you have basically three kinds of areas I think you can invest in. One is incredibly visible, and that is adding new capability.
Mhm.
Another thing that's important to do as well is to resolve the tech debt you have. Decisions or technology or things that you chose, and particularly in this world, the stuff's changing so incredibly fast. And then the third one is just being able to deploy and scale the stuff out so you get more adoption and use of it have. So you're kind of balancing, where do I make my investments? Well, same's true with products, that, okay, we can add new features, but at the same time, we have to fix our tech debt. At the same time, we have to move it so the underlying pinnings of it is Oracle based. And so there's always this kind of balancing act. There's a lot of pressure from the corporation to sit on top of Oracle tech, but at the same time, there's a lot of pressure from the customers to add new features.
Well, do you have an example of when maybe one of the companies you acquired was using competitive products and you had that push to bring them onto Oracle products, but it
Well,
didn't happen fast enough?
well, it
Or
happened all the time that, if we obviously preferred to acquire a company that their underlying tech was Oracle based, but, that didn't happen all that often. And so I think it's just a tension that we dealt with. First of all, we knew that we were supporting, multiple environments if they happen to be running something else. But second of all, it's not very positive from a marketplace that, hey, I'm acquiring this thing, but it's not running on Oracle, and so forth. We had run into that at one level or another with, a lot of the acquisitions, and it's just something that you had to work and play out over time. Everyone was different. Some things happened really quite quickly. Others, by design, were enabled to go take out to live for some point few because everyone kind of agreed that it was better to add more functionality or resolve open issues the customers have with the product to improve the usability or functionality or performance or whatever it is. So it's a balancing act between adding new stuff, fixing what you have, resolving tech debt, and standardizing the platform.
Okay.
But all these things, again, are done by, and I keep getting back since I've been working with you, getting a better appreciation on culture. Culture really dictates the speed at which decisions are made, but also culture dictates the speed or the breadth of the impact those decisions have. Like one of the times, it's probably 20 years ago, I'm speaking out east at an Association of Computer Machinery. It's like you do a lot of things over your career that you just kind of remember.
Mm.
And I had given a speech, and at the end, we opened it up, and there's hundreds of people in the audience. And they asked me, how would you describe Larry Ellison? And off the cuff, I said, well, Larry's not dissimilar from a lot of really highly regarded senior leaders. He knows which way we need to turn.
Mm.
And so, an awful lot of companies have that. But fewer companies, a subset of those, have the intestinal fortitude to actually make the tough call. So Larry knows where we need to go, but is also willing to make kind of bet the company calls. And so that's a smaller group of concentric circle. And even a smaller group is when know what to do, I'm making the big bet the company call that everyone actually turns right and does that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that I saw at Oracle. If a decision was made, sometimes really, significant, kind of big risky things, but the culture of the company was, okay, we're all going to turn. People didn't, there wasn't a whole lot of passive resistance. Well, he didn't really mean me, or this doesn't affect me, and so forth. Obviously, at scale, you have some of that, but overwhelmingly, if the decision was to turn left, we're friggin' turning left. Yesterday, I mentioned the call that I got when I talked about being the largest known installed base at the time of Dell Computing and NetApp storage systems. We literally, on the day it was announced, not the day we acquired, the announced we were buying Sun, we had to somehow figure out how all these, we were buying servers and storage, in the hundreds per month kind of thing. We had to figure out how are we going to put an entirely new platform while very similar, not the same. And so, that's just kind of was built into the culture. One of the things that as a CIO you like is to be simple, standardized, centralized, and then automate the hell out of everything. But that we were simplified, standardized, and centralized, not only within a line of business, not only within a geography, around the world. The same tech that we use for security and networking, all the applications and stuff, for 140 employees, 40,000 employees across every aspect of the business. That is a cultural bias. And by the way, historically, Oracle had not been that way. Up and through the 90s, using Larry's own terms, we were a weak king, strong duke model.
Okay.
And so what he means by that is, let's say, go to market and pricing. In Redwood City, California, they decide here's a product and here's what the pricing would be. And then that would be communicated out to the regions. Well, in Geneva, where I think we were running Europe, they go, look at that. Well, those Americans have no clue about our market, and this is what the pricing should be. And then they send it over to the UK. Well, God, those guys in Geneva, they're off in the mountains skiing or whatever. They don't know what we need here in London. And so there was a high degree of autonomy on systems, process, customer support, and those sorts of things. And then in the late 90s, this kind of giant transition had occurred of going to a strong king, weak duke model, where we're going to have, first of all, centralized system. Instead of having over 100 different ERPs, we're going to have a single one for the entire world. We're going to have only a single IT team. We're only going to have a single marketing team. We're only going to have a single HR team. Oh, if you can imagine the cultural transition that it takes from a highly decentralized to a highly centralized. But I, back 15, 20 years ago, used to give a lot of speeches about this transformation. Um, Not only did we have a huge impact on improving cycle times and that sort of thing, but the operating margin of the company went from 17% to well over 30%.
Wow.
I mean, you would think it'd have
Almost
an
doubled.
impact. No one had the clue of the kind of impact we had because we had all these gaps and overlaps and all these different cultures that were working around the world that were working at odds, creating all these kind of inefficiencies. By really fundamentally transforming the culture and how we operated this company. Once again, it was much, much smaller than it is today, but still, it was a fundamental transformation. Did everyone like that? Certainly, if you're used to being king and you're running a country and you own everything, and now basically you run sales for that region, those roles changed a lot. But on the other hand, the opportunity to really operate the company far more efficiently and far more integrated. Provide one of the problems we ran into, we're dealing with a multinational. Let's say it's at the time Hewlett Packard.
Mhm.
We looked like a different company every country we engaged
Hmm.
with HP. And with this transformation that we went through, we looked like a single company. So those are the kinds of things that I speak to the core culture. How do we want to operate as a business? How do we want to look to our customers? If a company's global, do we want to look like one company to them, or do we want a personalized, regionalized point of view? What I argue, maybe it works as a restaurant, to have a little kind of different customer experience in Italy than you have in New York. But a large enterprise software company, I think there's a lot of benefit to looking like a single company wherever the world you are.
Well, that's a pretty big success. That we talked continuing about statistics. The statistics also show that 88% of these digital transformations fail. So taking a company like Oracle and transitioning and transforming it in this type of way is a pretty big success. That you almost had 2x the operating margin.
Oh, I had the opportunity to speak about this a ton because it was such a big transformation. If you think about it, what had happened leading up through the 90s, Oracle had its ups and downs. Ray Lane came in and was running the company for a bit. He was removed. And so, one of the things we saw, like many tech companies, is our revenues were in the late 90s with the dot-com were really, really expanding.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing was our margin wasn't.
Hmm.
The company got bigger, more complex, and so the gaps and overlaps started showing more, and our margins started declining. That was really a catalyst for, Larry saying, we need to reinvent how we run this business and go from a highly decentralized to a highly centralized model. So there's nothing like the numbers, the financials to cause a fundamental cultural shift on how we're going to run this company, how we're going to make decisions.
So I'd like to maybe double down a little bit more on the people part of this transformation. As you know, Grodivo, we're very focused on helping companies through these types of transformations. By quantifying culture, you can see where you might meet resistance to these types of changes. I imagine all of these fiefdoms, these dukes, as you called it. It would have been great to understand ahead of time, who you had to spend maybe the most time working with. How did you deal with that back then?
Well, first of all, it was before my time.
Okay.
I was at Sable, but nonetheless, I'm an anthropologist and I spoke a lot on the company's behalf on the corporate level things. So the model that was taken is each of the organizations around the world. If you think of, let's talk about one of the more core aspects, we're going to centralize basically the operating system of the company,
Mhm.
the ERP. And what Larry shared with me is they started with who was in the most trouble. And I think it was our Latin America business was this wasn't going well from the standpoint of having an operating platform and everything that worked for them. So if we're going to create something brand new that's designed to support the globe, go where you've got the most fertile audience, and that happened to be, I believe in this case, Latin America. And so it kind of started going around the world a bit by looking for those opportunities, those people, the culture that they're more willing to buy into this. And so it was first the carrot, and then, as time went on, it became the stick. If you're running the corporate system, it's going to be no cost. If you do anything on your own, you're going to have to pay through the nose for it. And so it started off with the carrot, look for your targets of opportunity, and then transition. And ultimately, the last to kind of get on this global central operating system, ERP, was the United States, because it's the biggest, most complex, and so forth. But over a course of just a couple of years, fundamentally changed. I mean, if you imagine you're a highly decentralized organization with its own procurement, go-to-market, even HR, and somebody knocks on the door. If you're a procurement guy or gal, you report to the procurement organization out of the US. If you're legal, you report to the legal out of the US. If you're marketing, you report to marketing out of the US. So it was really, a dramatic shift, but the benefits of far exceeded anyone's expectations. Who knew that there was that much? And I'd argue all of that speaks to how your operating model, but also speaks to, the culture of how much untapped capability an organization has. If you can dramatically reduce the friction and cycle time it takes to make decisions by having really clear how we're going to operate. And really, what is culture? It's the operating mentality of how decisions are made and how people work together, or how people collaborate. If I believe that probably is the single greatest opportunity to dramatically improve the effectiveness of an organization, is fundamentally change or improve its operating system of people, how they communicate, collaborate, work together, decisions are made, and so forth.
So you actually don't know this, but we'll be launching new branding for our platform. And one of the main things we're calling it is Culture OS, because it's truly our goal to become the culture operating system and serve that purpose, and much like you said, for success across all areas.
Well, it makes total sense. That's really what the culture is. It's the operating system for an organization. It can be faulty, it can be leaky, it can grind slowly, but on the other hand, it can be incredibly smooth. It's very clear to me how decisions are made. It's very clear to me how communicate and collaborate. It's very clear to me how we plan and execute. It's a whole lot more engaging, enjoyable if everything's clear on how we're going to operate. And when I have an input, I think we ought to be doing something different. It's kind of clear how I, message that. And so, yeah, I think culture is really the OS of an organization.
Yeah.
Culture is the OS of my family. If you think about how we work together, collaborate, communicate and stuff. And it, like every company, we got our things that we could continue to refine and improve on.
Excellent. So you've talked about acquisitions, you've talked about transformations, you've also talked about the, let's say, journey and transition to cloud yesterday. Which of those was maybe the most challenging for you? What were the things that you learned kind of from each of those three areas of major strategic change?
Well, first of all, some of them they're intertwined. If you think about acquiring Sun, we're a software only company. We're Oracle. All we do is sell software. And then one day, I think it was like February 10th, on 2010, someday the Sun deal closed, and we now have to deal with stuff like was not in our comprehension at all, like part master, bill of material, supply chain, lead times, I mean, all of these things had to be baked into kind of this operating system that we had. At the same time, we've got financial pressures to drive synergies. Here you have these two big companies. Sun, quite frankly, was bleeding money about last I saw a report about 100 million a month.
Mm.
And so we really needed to, how do we drive this effectively? But we had a lot of experience um, assimilating software companies. And at that time, it's largely on-premise software companies. Now we had something dramatically different, and also a company that was much different like culture. So that was of the transformations and assimilation was by far the most difficult. Like, for example, retaining the senior talent, like Jim Gosling, the inventor of Java. Our culture and everything. Um, Sun had this big open source mentality. Well, that didn't align with Oracle's
Yeah.
mentality. So it was difficult. We lost far more of the senior leadership at Sun, but nonetheless, it was a great strategic deal because as Oracle's now moved into the cloud over time, whether it be the servers and storage, but also Exadata, we can build these specialized devices that have embedded database that are a device that's engineered to do nothing but run an Oracle database incredibly well.
Hmm.
So it turned out to be a really good thing, but there was a lot of carnage along the way. But that was targeted and it touched, a big portion of the company, but still somewhat limited. By far, the biggest transformation, and it took many years to really do it, was going from a behemoth on-premises company to cloud. As I was mentioning yesterday, it changes everything. It changes your software engineering. You're not just building a product and kind of throwing it over the fence. You're building something that you have to run and operate. And the whole concept of hyperscale, I think was new. The whole it's one thing, we operated the computing we used to run our company. Now we're operating the computing that's used to run hundreds, actually thousands of companies. Building that into the DNA, be able to secure it, be able to ensure the privacy, be able to ensure the availability on a global basis. All of those things were incredible learnings. But I had a discussion with you a bit yesterday. One of the things that helped along the way was as we started acquiring cloud native companies, obviously at a much smaller scale than Oracle was operating at, but you could see the full ecosystem of what a cloud native company looks like. And so we could get, lots of learnings on how do you have the processes, how do you have the communication collaboration that allows you to deliver a service as opposed to a product that you ship.
Excellent. So you mentioned with Sun specifically that you lost a lot of key people, soon. Yesterday, you mentioned that one of the main measures of success that you had internally in Oracle was retaining those key people. We at Grodivo, we like to think about attrition in terms of desired and undesired attrition, right? And for us, that's a bit of who fits in the new organization or in the new culture that's part of the strategy. Back then, you wouldn't have been able to easily tell who would fit and who wouldn't fit. But now that you can, how would you think differently about retaining people that fit with the culture you were trying to drive, and also the need to have this domain expertise in your
Well, I think
acquired companies?
you'd be it's like having a map, or you'd have roadmap or predictability. You can see where, we're going to, where potentially an organization potentially have issues. So you can choose, is this something that I want to deal with and act accordingly, as opposed to be somewhat surprised.
Hmm.
The more informed you are to make informed decisions, the better those decisions will be. So for example, Oracle did not have, a big open source mentality, and that was very much core to Sun. That could be a strategic decision that we're just not going to go there, and we're going to, we're going to, deal with the consequences. But it turns out, though, we did. One of the reasons why Oracle acquired Sun was Java. And, it's used on every Android phone and billions of devices around the world. That was one of the important aspects of, making this acquisition. So really, I'm sure there are things potentially we could have done better as we brought in Java to, retain some of the key talent around that and other aspects. I think bottom line is the more informed you are, the better the decisions you're going to make. And so I think appreciating the culture, not only as an organization as a whole, but departments and functions and geographies within that organization gives you the opportunity to make much better informed decisions on what you're going to do. And that informed decision could be, I know Greg is much different than, kind of the executive culture that we have here. I'm going to reach out to Greg and really try to understand what's important for him, what we could do here to, really help him be successful and realize his goals, and see if we can come to some mutual agreement. If we could identify where those issues are, we much better chance that we could take them head on. And, a lot of times there's learnings. Oh, I didn't realize that we're so different in these ways. And we'd actually kind of like to be more like that. So I believe the more information you have, the better the decisions you have. And so having data around one of the most critical aspects to the success of any acquisition is the data around the culture. I think you're going to be much more effective in dealing with it.
What about thinking from the other side? You were the acquirer a lot. You were acquired when it came
Yep.
to Siebel. There are lots of examples, that are recent. Take Meta acquiring Scale AI, for example, $50 billion acquisition. They put the CEO of Scale in charge of everything AI in Meta, and within 6 months, key people at Scale had left. Key people at Meta were leaving. It seems like this example keeps repeating itself in M&A all over the place. Same with Amazon's acquisition of Whole Foods, $13 billion acquisition. They wrote off 10 billion of that, and the CEO of Whole Foods left soon thereafter. Seeing it from the side of being acquired, how could this information maybe help people understand where they need to make adjustments, or even decide who a better acquirer for their company would be?
Yeah. Let's start at the very beginning. You just kind of touched on it. Maybe it wasn't a good decision in the first place. Going back to the historical archives, Sprint, Nextel, Time Warner,
AOL.
AOL. I mean, a lot of these were train wrecks ready to happen, or colliding garbage trucks, or whatever the case may be. You can use, but sometimes I think you have to back up and say, is it such a mismatch on what we do and how we do it that it's simply not going to work? So I think you have to, first of all, maybe that ties in with the due diligence. Let's really understand what our cultural differences are. And is that something that we're going to be able to navigate our way through? And then once the acquisition's made, I think being informed as to, how the organizations work, and then making conscious decisions. What are we going to do? Are we going to create a higher level of autonomy? Are we going to meet somewhere in the middle? Are we going to strong arm it, like in our early days, you will be assimilated, we are the Borg thing, at Oracle? I mean, but I think, once again, having the data and allows you to make informed decisions how you want to handle the situation.
You talked about diligence, and clearly having data in a diligence process is critical. One of the most common, audit type things in diligence is quality of earnings. We like to talk about what we do in diligence as quality of culture, essentially. And while what we measure isn't necessarily a yes or no, 100% or less, we can measure where that misalignment could happen, so that an integration can be better planned. Yesterday, we talked about playbooks and processes for integrations. Um, you also talked about synergies and the importance of being able to capture those synergies sooner. Having this data, how could it have informed possibly uh, the level of synergies you expected to get from an acquisition, but also the integration plans so you could capture those synergies sooner?
Well, first of all, the synergies, the speed at which and whether you acquire the synergies is very often determined on how you deal with the cultural differences and how well they assimilate. So it's absolutely key to realize the value out of an acquisition from PowerPoint actually into earnings for the company. But by understanding and argue that it's not just at the organization, you have to look at the department function, line of business, geography, and so forth. Really understand what the differences are, what kind of degree of difficulty is this going to cause, and then have well thought out plans as to this is a risk we're willing to take, or this is something that we're going to try to morph, we're going to understand, we're going to meet, we're going to adjust, we're going to adjust our culture to better, like for example, not familiar with specifics behind it at all with Amazon and Whole Foods, but Amazon really understanding how are we going to morph in order to, bridge with a company that's so incredibly different than we are. In fact, it's hard for me just looking completely from the outside, two companies, because I was in Austin when Whole Foods was
Ah,
created and so forth. So I have this history with Whole Foods, the very first Whole Foods.
yes.
And, it's hard for me to imagine two companies with cultures kind of further apart. And so I think consciously going in with that, first of all, in the due diligence process, being aware, and then, stepping through, okay, this is what we're going to do in order to, make this a successful marriage.
Great. And then afterwards, thinking of that integration and then ongoing operations, even after, say, the synergies have been acquired and you've fully integrated, let's say, one of you, as you know, one of our key abilities is to be able to see culture changing in real time. So when you think of operationally, all of the transformations that you've gone through, how valuable would it have been to be able to see and tweak decisions as you go when it comes to culture?
Well, going back to my semiconductor days, we were always about real-time statistical process control.
Mm.
Uh, One of the great things that I'm fortunate to have had in my career is 20 years in semiconductor that's so incredibly process oriented, where you're worried about yield and cycle time. I mean, and everyone in the entire organization thinks about yield and cycle time. That process orientation is not necessarily what all software companies and tech companies, not to the degree a semiconductor company is. So it's having that orientation, I think, gave me a good backdrop as to how you move in and you figure out how you're going to execute. But one of the aspects of that is the real time visibility to it. I mean, as every single thing's going on as you're building a wafer fab, I mean, building a wafer in a fabrication facility, you have complete real time visibility so you can make real time adaptation. When you're running a global network, global security for a company like Oracle, having real time visibility so that you can detect an intrusion or detect an anomaly or detect something that's not working important, that is absolutely critical to you being able to provide the quality of service that your employees and your customers need and deserve. Likewise, being able to get real-time visibility as to what's going on with your people, and that once again ties into how decisions are made, how they're communicated, how they're collaborated, how they're internalized and followed through, is absolutely key. So every bit of being able to monitor what's going on in our network and our security and back to building semiconductor wafers. Having that visibility into how our company's running from a decision, collaboration, communication standpoint is, I think, every bit as key. I never had those tools during my career, but I'm certain it could have improved my effectiveness and, more importantly, the effectiveness of my organization.
Great. We've touched very briefly on, say, customer centricity. You mentioned how much you loved to always be in front of customers, talking to customers. There's definitely differences in how different companies approach customer centricity, right? Apple is or was the type of company that's where we tell you as a customer essentially what you want. Here's the future. We know what it is, and here you go. And other companies, maybe like Oracle, who and Cisco is another good example where they would constantly be pulling customers to find out, what they would like, what types of features, all of those types of things. That dichotomy or those key differences between how you approach customer centricity, we ultimately look at as part of our system. And I'm curious to hear from you, which model you've seen work the best, but also how important it is to be consistent in how those models are deployed in terms of your people dealing with customers.
Well, there's no doubt that Steve Jobs, with the creation of iTunes, it was absolutely fundamental to changing, how music is distributed, and I mean that was incredible insight. The user experience around the first iPods, and then extending into, the iPhone. No one had thought prior to the iPhone that you're actually anyone's going to want to type. We all had our Blackberries, or it's going to want to type on a screen.
Yeah.
But, those kind of breakthrough insights, I think, are huge to the success of, really transforming. Like I used to think of this within my IT organization. If I went and asked an accountant or whatever, what can we do to improve the process of what you're doing? They would have us electrify their pencil, kind of thing. So I'm a believer that sometimes really transformational breakthroughs are not going off and asking. And I certainly saw this within serving my customer base as a CIO. Um, Transformative things often require a nudge. Here is an entirely different way. Matter of fact, that's one of the things I prided myself on throughout my career is understanding or having members of my team understand the lines of business, services, functions we were dealing with as well as they did. But also our mission was to go off and look at, are there fundamentally better ways to do this stuff? And so I believe you need to have a bit of that for really a lot of breakthroughs. But on the other hand, I subscribe to the whole lean startup thing that create an MVP, show it to the client, get that feedback, and constantly iterate it. In fact, that's how Siebel got started. Took a couple showcase customers, Cisco being one, Compaq being another, and just constantly iterate with them. What do you need to run a large scale organization, a global, on understanding all the data around your customers from the initial marketing contacts all the way through, closing contracts. So I believe both approaches are valid. I love taking a technology, a thought, a process, or something that's totally outside the realm of anything that's been used before and transform how something's being done. But at the same time, the whole idea of constantly iterating in front of customers on how do we make this better. So I've been actually with organizations that have done both, come up with an entirely different way of doing things, but also done that really extensive iterative improvement by showing the customer, getting the feedback, improving it, and going through it. So, and I personally believe that there needs to be, a bit of both of that within an organization. Breakthrough thinking doesn't always, often doesn't happen by going and asking somebody what they want. You show them an entirely different way of doing what they it. I mean, you can go with the classic examples of Uber and Airbnb, and that was breakthrough thinking. That did not come from Hilton or Marriott.
Hmm.
It did not come from taxi services. It came from individuals looking at an opportunity. What's our real goals? Get people to get from one place to another, or have a place for people to stay. And I think you should nurture within the organization. Breakthrough thinking is also customer centric. But on customer centricity, though, in a broader sense, one of the things maybe I mentioned yesterday, uh, Siebel was very, very customer centric. And I loved that every piece of artwork in any building anywhere in the world was all front of a customer annual report, a customer ad, what have you. There was no art that wasn't about customers.
Hmm.
There was no conference room that wasn't anywhere in the world that wasn't named after a customer.
Oh, really?
And so I just think having in the front of your employees all the time, why do we exist? It's for these customers. Now, one thing that was just kind of funny, my office at Siebel, my conference room right next to my office, the title of that conference room was one of our customers, Toys R Us.
Hmm.
That is not the conference room you want to have next to the CIO, that everyone in the company kinds of thinks that, oh, those IT guys are off playing with new toys.
That's pretty funny. It sounds like it, if I kind of translate a little bit, you see the value of having both in an organization, but not everyone, especially in a process-focused type of an organization, is designed, let's say, or themselves really have that within them to be step change innovators. How do you look at maybe having a tiger team or a skunk works team within an organization that's very process focused to be able to accomplish
So that's one of the things that I actually did at Oracle,
that?
where let me give you an example. Uh, we within the IT team, from onboarding or driving adoption of new tools and capabilities, we had hundreds, if not thousands, of capabilities, and we had over 100,000 employees that we needed to educate and train and so forth on these things. So we had built technology that how were we going to provide, on demand, like you want to know how to um, uh, put VPN on your device so you can access Oracle's network from some remote place. Just coming on. There are 1,000 things like that that we needed to have a way that you could, on a global scale, without a human having to personally teach you through or walk you through how to do this. And so we had built this whole capability, around doing it. We were investing in having, to have on-demand videos that you could make it easy to post, create, distribute, search through, and so forth. But we went around and looked. There were 25, 30 different organizations, whether it's marketing for customer facing things, it's sales, all kinds of sales training things, HR for how to adjust your compensation, or you get married and you need to change your beneficiaries, or Oracle University training employees on how to do things. We literally found probably more than 24 organizations that had stood up some level of platform. Our scale was a bit bigger, so we were a bit more comprehensive. And so the thought was, no one was coming to us and saying, would you go redo this for us? Because they just thought this is something they have to do. We have to educate our things. But, one of the initiatives, that I said we're going to do, we are going to do this at scale much better than any organization could do on their own. We're already bigger, so we can afford to invest a little bit. But what happened was, we decided to build an internal YouTube. This was, 15 years ago, but make it super easy to create content, be able to post that content, be able to search the content, be able to put security around it that this stuff is only targeted for these people, all that kind of stuff. And started going around, an organization will realize, well, I'm going to take my investment in doing this and just contribute it to this other thing,
Mm.
which then allowed us to have more innovation and more capability, more scalability. And then ultimately walked around all of those organizations because our platform became so big and comprehensive and had so much capability that they wanted to take their investment. So it just doubled down. We had more people doing more, investing in it quicker, creating more and more capability. And so it was one of those things, no one asked us to do it, but it just, being a CIO, no. I come from a DNA. If you pricked my finger, took my blood, you would see that I've got the simplify, standardize, centralize, automate the hell out of everything gene. And that was just one opportunity. No one's asking us to do it, but we just did it. But that gave us the scale to really have a significant amount of innovation going on because our audience, our target, our market was so much bigger. The bigger the market we can create for Grodivo, the more we can afford to invest in innovation. And likewise with what we're doing, for us to support 1,000 versus 10,000, the incremental cost of that is trivial. But the opportunity to have innovation when you have 10,000 people using it versus 1,000, the investment that you can put behind it in terms of having innovation, scalability, and others is obviously much more significant. So I'm all about economies of scale, making stuff big, centralized solutions for multiple user bases and driving as much value. But 9 times out of 10, it's not that people are asking for it. It's that you, in my role, CIO, but in any role you have, look at those opportunities that you can fundamentally improve and transform the quality of services and products.
Excellent. You mentioned automation a few times during that response. How do you see the change and progress in technology when it comes to automation? Even with TQM and Six Sigma, at the beginning, you would have had engineers, manually taking, notes and measures and all those types of things. Fast forward, you know, decades, you now have sensors doing all of that work. But when it comes to new technological shift, a lot of times there is that need to start with something kind of more manual before you can deliver on the value of being completely automated.
Well, I mean, that's always been the kind of methodology that first kind of manually understand what the process is and then look at the opportunity to automate it. And that's clearly what we've done, over the years of, doing desktop simulations and that sort of thing. I think a lot of things around the speed of automation, the prototyping of automation has fundamentally changed with AI. The ability to if we wanted to demonstrate an MVP, put a viable product in front of a potential customer and have them give us feedback on that, the time frame to do that in this world of AI is 10, 100, maybe even 1,000-fold faster than it was. So this whole idea of how one innovates, how one automates has been so accelerated that we have to really figure out, well, we have this opportunity to do stuff fast. How are we going to, take advantage of it? Like the whole automation life cycle, through technology in the earlier parts of my career versus what it is now is so different that just like with a new product, we can, quickly iterate through our opportunities to automate, improve business processes because we can do it in hours instead of months. So I think it changes not only how we develop automation stuff, but also it dramatically increases the market of things we do automate. The investment I'd have to put around automating a lot of things just on how I manage my home a decade ago would have been 10, if not more, X than it is now for being able to integrate, tie things together. And that's, even larger so for an enterprise.
Yeah, absolutely. And applying that automation and technology to people and teams, right? You were talking about how you utilize Tiger teams in order to solve these problems that nobody really saw, right? How would you today look at forming those teams, seeing compatibility, so that those teams start running immediately instead of what I would say most people experience, where you spend time trying to figure each other out and get to know each other, who's going to lead the team, who's going to be which roles on the team.
Yeah, like at Oracle, we had scrums, and you put these people together from different disciplines, so they have all the different skills necessary for delivering a sprint, delivering on a capability, on a user story. And we never factored in, quite frankly, culturally, how well is this group of 10 folks or so going to work together? Once again, information leads to informed decisions. Well, I'm sure there are things that we could have done. There could practices we put in place. In fact, maybe we have to take these 10 people to create this scrum. Well, one of the first things they should do is let's just have a more formal process on how we're going to assess how each of us likes to work together and how we can be more effective, and figure out what is the process, what is the tools, technology, and stuff we're going to do. What are things that we're going to have to morph to have an effective culture? If you think of a Scrum, it's all about how they work together. Decisions are made quickly, and they can deliver sprints on a really tight time frame cadence. I think putting tooling, like once again, to organize and understand where they're at in order them to more quickly get to where they want to be as effective as they can be. I think it, be, really transformational. One thing that I've been consistent about this is that we have been driving largely blind, I think, most of the time, relative to what the culture is on these teams, large organizations, cross organization, how the culture would be within my technology team that's servicing all these different
Mm.
organizations across the company. Our cultures could be dramatically different, what we expect and how we expect to communicate and stuff. The more information we have to understand where we are, um, then we can educate and figure out where do we want to be and what are the steps we have to do in order to get there.
All of these types of initiatives you've talked about require metrics in order to track and move forward. Clearly, culture up to this point has been considered, let's say, soft, and the metrics
Mhm.
around culture have been soft. So I'd like to hear your thoughts when we come back on that. All right, Mark. So we've talked quite a bit about how critical culture is in terms of leadership and being the operating system for efficiency, how things get done in an organization, how decisions are made, collaboration, communication. One thing that I've seen quite a bit, and I'm sure you have as well, when it comes to board meetings, and board members are interested, obviously, in all aspects of the business. They have fiduciary duty to ensure that businesses run well. um, I've seen ultimately when HR comes up to the table, it's their turn to present. That because HR metrics tend to be very soft or considered soft, especially in comparison to the other metrics in a business, that board members kind of tend to use that as their time to catch up on emails and texts that have come in along the way. What has been your experience in board meetings with HR metrics? How can we make them harder and more tied to the success of the business?
I think you're absolutely right. Over the years, there's not been as much focus on things. I mean, of course, people care, are employees satisfied? That's bottom line, one of the big ones that gets looked at. But, they care a lot more about the revenue, profitability, and so forth. I think increasingly, as culture is being understood to be the speed and effectiveness of how an organization works, more enlightened executives are starting to understand, appreciate, and ask about what is the culture, how well are we working together, what are the opportunities for improvement. But I think it's been somewhat of a slow transition. I think with Grodivo that we have the way to provide that visibility
Mm.
as to what the culture is and how consistent it is. Across the organization, is the culture the way we want it to be? We think we're innovative, but we're command and control,
Mm.
and we're not giving people the opportunity to express their opinions. I think in more recent years, board members are beginning to look at that because they're increasingly realizing that how you communicate, collaborate, how you make decisions actually is really determine how effective the organization is. There are metrics that are related to how well a company's operating, obviously profitability, sales growth, and all those sorts of things. But they're quite a few steps removed from what we directly think as culture. As we can come closer to measuring the operating efficiency for how we work together, how we communicate, collaborate, how we plan, how we make decisions, how those decisions are executed on, I think the more we have that visibility closer to the culture, the more that boards are going to realize, hey, this is really important. We need to invest in it.
When you think about how to measure and make that direct line to efficiency and operating margin and all these other types of things, revenue per employee, uh, is it is it more focusing on the gaps or the misalignment between what you desire for the culture or what culture is best for your strategy and the people?
I think if we could highlight where we have misalignments, where we have gaps, where we have things of white space that one organization has delivered something and it hasn't been picked up. If we can highlight those things are caused by the culture not being optimized, not being aligned, not being consistent, the better off we'll be. So I think we want to be able to, identify, is our operating system working how it should be?
Mm.
Are people communicating, collaborating, making decisions? Do people trust, more than customer employee satisfaction, which of course, is important. I'd like to be able to drill down on, um, do the employees feel that we have a crisp decision-making process, well-defined decision-making process? Do the employees feel that they have the opportunity to communicate their opinions? I think that as HR organization or me as an operating unit, I would love to not only present how well my team's doing in terms of driving value to the business, but how well we're operating
Mm.
and how we've improved that over time. So I think there's some education, but I think it really will come from successes of us being able. I think intuitively, many of us understand that the effectiveness of how an organization operates is completely based on the culture of that organization, but we just haven't had any way to measure it. We haven't had any way to assess it. The more that we can put that front and center, the more that boards, executive teams, business function leaders, geography leaders will take that and really put it as areas of focus every bit as much as revenue and profit growth.
Yeah, we completely agree with Grodivo. There are surveys and measures every year that come out in terms of, say, like Gartner interviewing executives. One that's been pretty consistent is 80% of executives admit to not understanding their culture. And as I've had those conversations with executives of companies of all sizes, I hear, hey, I think we have a good culture. Our employees are satisfied, but I don't know necessarily what's good about it, what's bad about it, what I need to double down on, and how I can ensure that it stays consistently good,
I,
quote
I
unquote.
think we have this really great education opportunity with Grodivo. Um, some an executive could perceive we have a good culture because the employees are happy. I can tell a good way, easy way to make employees happy is we pay them more than they deserve. We give them all the time off they want, and we support all their hobbies. I mean, that would lead to a very happy workforce,
Yeah.
but does it lead to an effective workforce? So I think if we can move this culture, I think we have a good culture by actually measuring things that are important. That how well do we work together? How well do we communicate? How well are we making decisions? For decisions made, is it faithfully executed? As we start making cultural metrics more visible to executives, they won't think of culture as just our employees happy, but start educating them that the culture really is the operating system, and we want to see how well it's operating.
Hmm.
I think we have education to do.
I think you're exactly right. In fact, the latest research actually says that there is no good or bad culture, quote unquote. I would say a lot of people disagree with
I would
that
disagree with that.
if they feel like they're in a place that doesn't fit for them. But intuitively, if you look at the top tech companies, they're successful with vastly different cultures. And so the research says it is about fit and alignment. Some people will fit and align better in other cultures, than ones that maybe that they're in now.
I think that your culture determines things like, keep going back to it, how effectively you make decisions and how consistently are they executed on. You can have a complete command and control. One person's in charge of making all the decisions, everyone executes on that. That can be an effective culture. You can have one where a culture where decisions are delegated, and it's assumed when that individual is responsible for a particular area, when they make a decision on something, we're going to do that. It's a delegated, but it can be highly effective.
Yes.
But you can have a culture of indecision, a culture of lack of clarity. Um, so I think of you could have cultures can be different in terms of how they operate,
Yeah.
but the culture has to be effective. That's what we really should be highlighting is certainly we want to understand what our culture is and how many people are adapting to that, but we want to understand where that culture is breaking down, where we don't have clear ability on how we communicate and collaborating, aligning people to their mission, aligning people to the goals, aligning different organizations. Are their goals aligned? So I think different cultures can be effective, but within how effective is our culture and actually the things that allow us to execute with speed and accuracy and quality.
Yeah, and ultimately, the research is saying that's alignment at the end of the day. So, when we think about culture and the effect it can have, going back to this discussion on metrics, how can you make culture a financial lever? You have levers throughout the rest of the business for efficiency. Being a culture or having a culture OS and pulling that lever depending on what you think is the best culture for your strategy and what your goals are.
And are people executing against that culture?
Yeah.
That's a big thing is, if we think about culture as the operating system, there's multiple operating systems that can work effectively, but it's what is our alignment? What's our compliance? What are the things that are working well about it? And what are the things that aren't? Where do we have inconsistencies? Where, if that causes us to not be operating effectively?
Absolutely. But when you think about, how culture as a lever could impact the P&L, what comes to mind for you?
Oh, speed to value.
Hmm.
Um, how quickly one makes, decisions. As I shared yesterday, one of the things that, I really liked about, the senior leadership at Siebel and Oracle was this kind of fundamental belief that you can recover from a poor decision. There is no
Yeah.
recovery from indecision. So the ability to quickly make decisions, understand who's making the decisions, um, has you know has a huge impact. So speed to value, speed to procs, the speed at which decisions are being made. And it's one thing making the decision. It's another thing having the culture that everyone adopts and aligns that and starts executing against it. One of the biggest things that I've seen over my career, particularly early on, is passive resistance.
Yeah.
We hear that we're all supposed to turn left, but they didn't mean me. And so culture, measuring the culture and how it's actually operating will help, you understand how decisions are being made, but then how actions are being realized.
Mm. And if those actions and that culture is aligned to the goals of the organization,
Right.
ultimately you're going to have efficiency. What do you think? I've talked to a number of VCs, venture capitalists, and private equity investors who have a portfolio essentially of companies they're invested in. I've heard, hey, when I assess these companies, I'm looking for culture. But when it comes to understanding what they're actually looking for, it then seems to be vague. And it's one of those, I know it when I see it types of a thing. When have you in your career kind of seen your gut feel maybe not bear out when it comes to the data, and how did you rectify that?
Yeah, I've walked into organizations that feel good, but they're operating nightmare.
Mm.
They're not executing against their goals. They're not delivering value to their customers. So I think intuition, and I'm big on intuition, but your intuition versus what the real results can be very, very different. Something can appear to have a good culture, but when you actually start looking at how things are operating, it'd be great to have the data on that. What's working, what's not working, how aligned is it? Not only at an individual to individual, but organization to organization level and geography to geography.
Yeah.
How well is how we're serving our customers aligned with how our customers want to be served? Like, one of the things that I used to think at Oracle is we can provide no better service to our customers than we provide our employees.
Mm.
And so that's a cultural thing. How are we going to engage with our employees sets the cap as to how our employees are going to engage with our end customers.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very good insight. What about with high growth companies? Ultimately, I think if you have a small startup, say maybe 10 people, you at least likely know or have worked together with those people. You're maybe they're 2 degrees of separation from you, so you can more easily contain or manage the culture. But once you get to, say, you're growing from 20 to 50, 50 to 100 to 300 in a very short amount of time, how critical would it be to have that data and understand how your culture is shifting and changing with
Oh,
this big
it's
influx of people?
unbelievably critical. One of the top investors, I remember hearing this story that highest probability of success of kinds of startups he found when he found up to 10 individuals who had been friends for a long, long time,
Yeah.
and they're going to go off and build something, because if they have this rapport, this relationship, this trust, we haven't talked about trust anywhere near enough over our
Mm.
conversation. They know that they're going to have to morph, they're going to have to adjust, they're going to have to make changes, but they have the trust and confidence in each other to be able to weather those storms. But as you get bigger, as you said, growing from 10 to up to hundreds, that becomes really problematic. You don't have this level of trust amongst these people. So be able to come in and, first of all, communicate. By the way, this is how we operate.
Yeah.
I mean, just think if I had a measurement of this is our operating system, this is how we work, and you as a prospective employee, does that fit with who you are?
Yeah.
And in fact, if I had a tool, you might not be self-aware enough to know what you fit best in. If I had a tool to be able that you could take to see how well you fit with how we want to operate.
Well, we have that now.
Yeah, that's incredibly valuable. So I'd like to be able to communicate, how we operate, and then also see that we're hiring people, that fit into that.
Hmm.
I think a diversity of opinion The diversity of experience is hugely important for an effective organization, but diversity of culture, in other words, how we're going to operate and work together, that's something that needs to be aligned.
Hmm. Interesting. You mentioned diversity, right? I think there's lots of research saying that diversity of thought, opinion, background, in many cases, is correlated with more innovative companies. But there are also, innovative companies that have kind of more homogeneity and less diversity. A good example might be like Chick-fil-A in the fast food industry, right? They are very specific about the type of people that fit with their culture, and they're still very successful in what they do. How does that kind of like, in your mind, help you think of the importance of alignment and making sure, like you said, people that come into an organization understand what they're going to get?
Well, I think you have to look at what kind of business you are. Chick-fil-A is wash, rinse, repeat. I mean, they created this model of what their stores look like, how they operate, their operating processes. It's all about being immensely repeatable
Mm.
and, consistently quality food, very simple menu, that sort of thing. They've engineered a repeatable process that can be scaled out by copying exactly effectively. But if your company relies on innovation, constantly beating the competition by innovating with new products and services, that requires a different culture than a wash, rinse, repeat,
Mm.
kind of business. So I think you have to look at what kind of business are we in and what kind of culture works best for helping us achieve our goals.
Absolutely. Uh, when I think about the future of this type of information, metrics about culture, there are going to be some companies maybe that their culture isn't what they would like it to be. Maybe there are big gaps that they didn't expect to see. At the end of the day, though, you mentioned people would want to know what that culture is, what they're going to get into when they join a job. Um, how would we rectify that in the sense that it's in everybody's best interest for this type of information to be made public so that you can attract the right employees for your goals and targets? But then there's also hesitancy in terms of, I might not be managing my culture the way I think or I hope I am.
Well, first of all, I went through business school like you did, and never once did we talk about how we're going to measure assess culture.
Mm,
The word culture, I'm sure, popped up from time to time, but
sure.
not something that we can really measure, understand where we're at, and then design where we want it to be. So I think that we have a education um, opportunity to educate senior leaders what the opportunity is to really via concrete, objective manner, measure the culture. And once we measure what it is, then we have the opportunity to understand where it could be better and design the culture we want to have. And then we can put in place what are the steps we're going to take to achieve that. I think most of us have just been flying blind because we didn't have instrumentation.
Mm,
And so once it becomes, more widely known, the instrumentation that's available through like Grodivo, I think, it can be game changing for a lot of organizations. I'm going to be able to, for the first time, something that I just quasi had a feeling about. A lot of that happened to do with, happiness and how well people are working and what turnover is and that sort of thing, or what the reasons for during exit interviews, why people are leaving. But I think as we make this availability of objective metrics on what our culture currently is, it then puts us in a position to first design, set the goal of what we would like it to be, and then come up with the steps we're going to take in order to get there.
excellent. And I look forward to having you with our team, our Grodivo team, along in this journey. Thank you for being a member of our board of advisors. And thank you so much for taking this time with me today and yesterday to hear all of your thoughts and learn from your experience throughout your career.
Yeah, no, this is something I really, really enjoy. It's something I'm very passionate about. As we've talked about, I've been involved with over 100 mergers and acquisitions. And at my stage in my career, Every single day I wake up and decide how I want to spend my time. And this is something I'm passionate about. So I'm looking forward to working with you and helping out wherever I can.
Thank you so much, Mark.